If someone had told me 10 years ago, when I first met him, that Grant would one day be sitting on my floor, I would have laughed. Not just a chuckle, a full, disbelieving, gut-wrenching laugh. Because Grant wasn't the kind of man who sat on floors. He was the kind of man who built them. He was my best friend Sarah's brother-in-law, a fact that felt like a cosmic joke designed specifically to torment me. For a decade, he existed in the periphery of my life, a solid, unmovable object at barbecues and holiday dinners. Always leaning against a wall, a bottle of beer in his hand, observing everyone with a quiet intensity that I found both terrifying and magnetic. He was a contractor, broad shoulders, hands that looked like they could crush stone, and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow that clung to a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. My life, by contrast, was built on soft edges. I was a graphic designer who worked from home. My world was pixels and Pantones, the quiet hum of my computer, my most constant companion. My apartment was my fortress, a carefully curated space of quiet colors, soft-footing rugs, and books stacked in precise, architectural piles. Solitude wasn't a condition, it was a craft. I had perfected it. Grant was chaos in a flannel shirt. He smelled of sawdust and something vaguely metallic, like hard work itself had a scent. When he spoke, which was rare, his voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. He never spoke to me directly. A nod in my direction was the most I could ever expect, an acknowledgement that I, the quiet friend of his sister-in-law, was occupying the same gravitational field. And I, of course, was hopelessly, silently, and pathetically in love with him. It was a foolish background ache, a low hum of longing I'd learned to live with like tinnitus of the heart. I observed him from a distance, collecting details like a magpie, the way a muscle in his jaw would tick when he was annoyed, the faint white scar that bisected his left eyebrow, the surprising gentleness with which he'd once fixed Sarah's daughter's bicycle chain, his large, calloused fingers moving with an impossible delicacy. He was married to Sarah's sister, Amelia. He was straight. He was, in every conceivable way, a locked door on a house I could never enter. The distance between us wasn't just a few feet of lawn at a family cookout. It was a canyon, a vast, unbridgeable chasm of orientation, personality, and circumstance. I was on one side, safe in my quiet observations. He was on the other, living a life I couldn't even begin to imagine. And that was the status quo. For 10 years. Until the phone rang. It was a Tuesday. The kind of gray, listless Tuesday where the sky is the color of dishwater and the day promises nothing but more of the same. My routine was my religion. Coffee at 7. Work at 7:30. Lunch at noon. Eaten while standing at the counter. My life was a series of neat, predictable boxes. Sarah's voice on the phone was a sledgehammer to that fragile structure. Now, I need a massive, massive favor, she sounded frayed, her voice thin and stretched. I could picture her pinching the bridge of her nose, her other hand waving in frantic circles as she talked. Anything, you know that, I said, my cursor hovering over a half-finished logo design. It's Grant. My heart did a stupid little stumble. A frantic bird beating its wings against the cage of my ribs. Just his name was enough to send my carefully constructed composure into a tailspin. Amelia left him. The words landed without weight at first. They were just sounds. Then they sank in, heavy and cold. Oh, wow. Is he okay? No, Leo, he's not okay, she said, her voice cracking. He's a mess. He's moving out. Today. And I'm stuck in this stupid conference in Chicago until Friday. He won't ask anyone for help. You know how he is. Stubborn. Proud, I knew. I had seen that pride in the set of his shoulders, in the way he refused to let anyone carry anything heavy if he was around. He's got a new apartment downtown, but he needs help with the big stuff. The bookshelf, the bed frame. I told him you'd help. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. Me. Help Grant. The idea was so preposterous, it bordered on the surreal. It was like asking a house cat to help a grizzly bear move his cave. Sarah, I don't think... Please, Leo. He's my family. He sounds so lost. He'd never admit it. But he needs a friend right now. even if he's too stubborn to say it. And you're the most reliable person I know. Please. For me, for her. That was the magic word. The key that always unlocked my reluctance. I couldn't say no to Sarah. And deep down, a treacherous, hopeful part of me didn't want to. Okay, I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign in my own mouth. Okay, I'll do it. Send me the address. The next hour was a blur of anxiety. I changed my shirt 3 times. I stared at my reflection, trying to see myself as Grant might see me. Just Sarah's friend. The quiet guy. Harmless. I felt anything but harmless. My insides were a churning sea of panic and a wild, terrifying hope. This forced proximity felt like a punishment and a gift all at once. I was being thrown into the canyon. His new apartment was in one of those new builds that pretend to have character. Gray brick, big windows, no soul. It was on the 4th floor. No elevator. Of course. I found his door ajar and knocked softly. It's open. A voice rumbled from inside. That voice. It hit me squarely in the chest. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was a hollow echo chamber of cardboard boxes and bare white walls. The air smelled of fresh paint and dust. And in the middle of it all, there was Grant. He looked different. Smaller, somehow, without the backdrop of a bustling family party. He was wearing a faded gray t-shirt that was dark with sweat across his chest and back. His hair was a mess, and the ever-present shadow on his jaw was closer to a full beard. But it was his eyes that stopped me. They were tired, defeated. The usual intimidating glint was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow weariness. He saw me, and for a second, his expression was blank. Then a flicker of recognition. Lau, Sarah said you were coming, yeah? She called. I said, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the empty room. My hands felt clammy. I shoved them in my pockets. You didn't have to, he said, not as a dismissal, but as a simple statement of fact. He looked down at his own hands, turning them over as if he'd never seen them before. They were scraped and raw at the knuckles. It's fine. I wasn't busy, a lie. I was always busy, even if it was just with my own thoughts. The silence that followed was immense. It filled the room, pressing in on me. I watched him, really watched him, up close and without the usual buffer of other people. I saw the fine lines around his eyes. I saw the way his shoulders slumped, as if he were carrying an invisible, crushing weight. This wasn't the confident, imposing man from the barbecues. This was a man whose world had been dismantled, box by painful box. He finally looked up, his gaze meeting mine directly for what felt like the first time ever. Well, the truck's downstairs. There's a bookshelf that's a real son of a bitch. The bookshelf was, indeed, a son of a bitch. It was old, solid oak, a monstrous thing that seemed to have been built by giants. Getting it up 4 flights of stairs was a Herculean task. I'll take the bottom, he grunted, positioning himself. You just guide it. I felt ridiculous. Guiding it. He was doing all the work, his muscles cording and straining under his thin shirt. I was just there to stop the corners from scraping the paint off the narrow stairwell walls. My hands were braced against the polished wood, and I was acutely aware of him, just a few feet below me. The sound of his breathing, harsh and rhythmic. The scent of his sweat, sharp and masculine. It was overwhelming my senses. We reached the final landing, both of us panting. The doorway to his apartment was narrow. Too narrow. We have to turn it, he said, his voice tight with effort. On 3. I'll lift. You pivot it sideways. Ready? 1, 2, 3. He heaved the bottom of the shelf upwards. I tried to pivot, my feet shuffling on the floor. For a terrifying second, the whole thing tilted, the weight shifting entirely onto me. I grunted, my arms trembling, my fingers screaming in protest. I got it, Grant said, quickly adjusting his grip. He moved closer, his body pressing against the back of the shelf. To get a better angle, he had to reach around the side. And that's when it happened. His hand, large and calloused and warm, closed over mine. It wasn't a caress. It wasn't gentle. It was a purely functional, accidental touch, his fingers gripping mine to steady the unwieldy piece of furniture. But for me, it was a lightning strike. A jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity shot up my arm, straight to my heart, which promptly forgot how to beat. Heat bloomed in my chest, spreading through my veins like wildfire. My breath hitched. All I could feel was the rough texture of his palm against the back of my hand, the sheer strength in his grip. My entire universe, for that one suspended moment, contracted to that single point of contact. The moment passed as quickly as it came. We maneuvered the bookshelf through the door, and it crashed to the floor of the living room with a deafening thud. He let go. He straightened up, wiping a forearm across his sweaty brow, oblivious. "Thanks. Told you it was a bastard." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, pulling my hand back and curling my fingers into a fist, trying to trap the lingering heat, the ghost of his touch. My skin tingled where he'd been. I felt branded, panicked. My carefully constructed walls were crumbling. This was too close, too real. The rest of the move passed in a similar state of heightened awareness. Every time we worked together on a piece of furniture, I was terrified our hands would brush again. The air between us felt charged, thick with unspoken things. Or maybe that was just me. Probably it was just me. We assembled his bed frame, another relic from his old life. Then came a flat-pack desk. He unboxed it and stared at the mess of particle board, screws, and incomprehensible diagrams with a look of pure loathing. "I build houses," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "I can frame a roof in a day. But this is just insulting." He tried for 10 minutes, his frustration mounting with every failed attempt to match piece A with slot B. He jammed a dowel into the wrong hole, swore under his breath, and finally threw the flimsy Allen key across the room where it skittered under a box. He sat back on his heels and buried his face in his hands. It was a moment of complete surrender, a crack in a stoic facade. Quietly, I picked up the instruction manual. My brain worked differently from his. I saw patterns, not problems. The diagrams, which were a foreign language to him, made perfect sense to me. It was just a puzzle, a visual logic problem. "Here," I said softly, my voice startling him. "Let me see." He looked up at me, his eyes guarded. For a second, I thought his pride would make him refuse. But then he just sighed, a long, weary sound, and gestured to the pile of parts. "Be my guest." I knelt on the floor and laid out the pieces, matching them to the booklet. I found the dowel he'd misplaced and gently worked it free. I found the right screws. Within 15 minutes, I had the basic frame constructed. He just watched me. I could feel his gaze on my back, on my hands as I worked. It wasn't a judgmental look. It was curious, surprised. "How did you—" he started, his voice quiet. "I'm good at instructions," I said with a small shrug, not looking at him. "It's my job to make things clear." Visually, I finished the desk. It stood there, wobbly but complete. A small, stupid victory in a day full of defeat. He ran a hand over its smooth surface. "Thanks," he said, and this time, the word was different. It was softer. It held a weight the previous ones hadn't. He was looking at me, really looking at me, and in his eyes, I saw a flicker of something new. Respect, maybe. The power dynamic, the one where he was the strong, capable one, and I was the flimsy, artistic hanger-on, had just shifted, if only by a few degrees. I wasn't just Sarah's friend anymore. I was the guy who could solve the puzzle he couldn't. And in the bare, lonely landscape of his new life, that small competence seemed to matter. By the time we were done, the sun had bled out of the sky, leaving bruised, purple clouds in its wake. The apartment was no longer empty, but it wasn't a home yet. It was a storage unit for the wreckage of a life. A bed in one corner, a desk in another. The monstrous bookshelf against the wall. Boxes everywhere. We were both filthy, exhausted, and drenched in sweat. "I'm going to order a pizza," Grant said. It wasn't a question. "You should stay." "Least I can do." I should have said no. I should have made an excuse and retreated to the safety of my own apartment, where I could dissect the day, especially the memory of his hand on mine, in peace. But I was a moth, and he was a flickering flame in the dark, and I couldn't bring myself to fly away. "Okay," I said. We ate sitting on the floor, the pizza box between us a makeshift table. A single lamp he'd unpacked cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. making the room feel smaller, more intimate. The city lights twinkled through the large window. It felt like we were in a bubble, suspended above the world. For a long time, we ate in silence. Not the awkward, strained silence of earlier, but a comfortable, quiet born of shared exhaustion. I was acutely aware of his proximity. Our knees were only inches apart. I could feel the heat radiating from him. I focused on my pizza, on the rhythmic motion of chewing, on anything other than the man sitting next to me. He was the one who broke the silence. She said I was suffocating, he said, his voice low and rough. He was staring at the half-eaten slice in his hand, as if it held the answers to the universe. Said I never talked. That I was just there, like a piece of furniture. My own slice of pizza suddenly tasted like cardboard. This was dangerous territory, a level of intimacy I was not prepared for. I didn't know how, he continued, his voice thick with a pain he wasn't trying to hide anymore. My old man, he wasn't talker. You worked. You provided. You kept your mouth shut. That's how you were a man. He gave a short, bitter laugh. Guess I learned that lesson too well. He finally looked at me, his eyes searching my face for something. Understanding? Judgment? I didn't know. I always thought you hated me, he said, the words so unexpected they knocked the breath out of me. What? No. Why would you think that? You never looked at me. At parties. You always looked away. Like I disgusted you or something. Like I was some kind of dumb animal my heart hammered against my ribs. Oh God. He had noticed. He had noticed my avoidance, my averted gaze, and he had completely, utterly misinterpreted it. The irony was a physical ache in my chest. I wasn't looking away because I hated him. I was looking away because looking at him was like staring directly into the sun. It was too bright. Too much. It hurt. The truth felt lodged in my throat, a sharp, painful thing. But the honesty in his eyes, the raw vulnerability he was showing me, demanded an honesty of my own. The dim light of the lamp felt like a confessional. I didn't hate you, Grant, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I was intimidated, he frowned, a line appearing between his brows. Intimidated? By me? You're a lot, I said, struggling for the right words. You're so capable, so self-assured. You walk into a room and you just own it, without even trying. I was never good at that. I'm the guy who fades into the wallpaper. I took a breath, the confession spilling out of me now, unstoppable. I didn't look away because I disliked you. I looked away because I was afraid if I looked too long, you'd see what? He asked, his voice soft, curious. Here it was. The precipice. I could step back, make a joke, deflect. Or I could jump. I jumped. That I thought you were impressive, I said, the word feeling laughably inadequate. That I couldn't stop watching you. That it made me feel like a complete fool. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was full, charged. Every molecule of air in the room seemed to be vibrating. He didn't move. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I had done it. I had ruined everything. He was going to laugh, or get angry, or just tell me to leave. My stomach was a knot of pure dread. My face was burning. I started to scramble for an apology, a way to take it all back. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Don't be, he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through my panic. And then he leaned in. It was slow, so agonizingly slow. He moved with a deliberate grace that seemed at odds with his powerful frame. He was giving me time. Every second was an eternity, a chance to pull away, to stop it. My brain was screaming at me to move, to run, to preserve the safe distance I had maintained for a decade. But my body was frozen. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. His face was close now. I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. I could feel his breath, warm and smelling of pizza and beer, on my skin. He paused, just a fraction of an inch away, his eyes asking a question my lips couldn't form. I didn't pull away. I closed my eyes, and then his lips were on mine. It wasn't a hard, passionate kiss. It was hesitant, questioning. His lips were chapped and firm. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated curiosity, a quiet exploration. His hand came up, not to my face or my hair, but to my shoulder, his thumb gently rubbing the tense muscle there, as if to steady me, or maybe to steady himself. It was a question, and my answer was to lean into it just slightly, to part my lips. A small sigh escaped me, a sound of surrender, of a 10-year-old tension finally being released. He deepened the kiss then, a low groan vibrating for his chest into mine. It was clumsy and honest and raw, and it was the most real thing I had ever felt in my entire life. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. "Leo," he breathed, his voice ragged. It was the first time he'd said my name like it meant something, like it was a discovery. I didn't know what came next. The instruction manual for this moment had never been written. But as his hand slid from my shoulder to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, pulling me gently back towards him, I realized I didn't need one. For the first time, I wasn't thinking. I was just feeling. One kiss turned into another. The floor was hard beneath us. The air was thick with the smell of cardboard and cheap pizza, and none of it mattered. We eventually moved to the mattress on the floor in the corner of the room, a clumsy tangle of limbs and hesitant touches. It wasn't about passion, not really. It was about comfort, about two lonely people finding a temporary anchor in a storm. We fell asleep fully clothed, his arm draped over my waist, his heavy, rhythmic breathing a soothing sound in the unfamiliar quiet of the room. I woke to the gray light of dawn filtering through the large, curtainless window. For a blissful, disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. I just knew I was warm. I was being held. Then memory came rushing back in a cold, brutal wave. Grant, the apartment, the kiss. My eyes snapped open. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the lingering warmth of sleep. Grant was still asleep beside me, his face peaceful, the hard lines softened. He looked younger, vulnerable. One of his large hands was resting on my hip, a casual, possessive weight. What have I done? The thought was a frantic scream in the silence of my mind. The intimacy of the night, which had felt so right and so necessary in the dark, now seemed like a catastrophic mistake in the harsh light of day. He's straight. He's heartbroken. He just left his wife. I was a momentary distraction, a port in a storm, an experiment. The litany of self-recrimination was a whip against my own foolishness. He was going to wake up, and regret would be the first thing he felt. Disgust, maybe. Pity, definitely. I couldn't face it. I couldn't bear to see that look in his eyes. My heart felt like a frantic, trapped bird, beating its wings bloody against my ribs. I had to get out. Now, before he woke up. Moving with the stealth of a thief, I carefully, painstakingly lifted his arm from my waist. The loss of his warmth was immediate and profound, a physical ache. I slid off the mattress, my feet silent on the cold wooden floor. I grabbed my shoes, my keys. I looked back at him one last time. He stirred in his sleep, murmuring something incoherent, and rolled into the space where I had been, as if seeking my warmth. The sight was a fresh stab of pain. On a scrap of cardboard from a pizza box, I scribbled a note. My hand was shaking so badly the letters were almost illegible. Had to go. Thanks for the pizza. It was pathetic, cowardly, but it was all I could manage. I left it on the floor next to him and slipped out of the apartment, closing the door behind me with a barely audible click. Each step I took down the 4 flights of stairs felt like a step away from the sun and back into a cold, familiar darkness. My apartment, usually my sanctuary, felt different when I got back. It felt empty. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was mocking. It was the sound of absence. I stripped off my clothes from the day before, which still smelled faintly of him, of sweat and sawdust and something uniquely Grant, and threw them in the hamper as if they were contaminated. I took the longest, hottest shower of my life, trying to scrub away the phantom sensation of his lips on mine, his hand on my skin. But it was useless. The memory was branded on me. The rest of the day was a study in anxiety. I sat at my desk, staring at the same logo I'd been working on before Sarah's call, but the colors and shapes were just a meaningless jumble. My phone sat on the desk beside me, a small black brick of potential doom. Every time it buzzed with an email notification, my stomach plummeted. I expected a text, a call, something, an angry message, a confused one. An awkward apology? Anything would have been better than the crushing silence. But nothing came. The first day bled into the second. The silence grew louder, more profound. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. My solitude, once my greatest comfort, was now my tormentor. Every quiet corner of my apartment reminded me of how alone I was, and how, for a few short hours, I hadn't been. I replayed every moment of our time together. The accidental touch, my clumsy confession, his hesitant kiss. I dissected every word, every look, searching for clues I might have missed. Had I misread everything? Had it all been a product of exhaustion and emotion and cheap beer? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that I had. I had projected a decade of my own secret longing onto a man who was simply at his lowest point. I had taken advantage of his vulnerability. The shame was a bitter taste in my mouth. By the evening of the second day, I had resigned myself to the new reality. I had broken it. Whatever fragile, potential friendship might have grown between us, I had shattered it with my foolish, selfish desires. He was erasing me, pretending it never happened. And the worst part was, I couldn't even blame him. It was better this way, safer. I was just settling into this miserable new status quo, trying to force down some toast that tasted like ash when there was a knock on my door. It wasn't a tentative knock. It was a solid, firm, three-rap rhythm that vibrated through the wood. My blood ran cold. I knew who it was. I knew it with a certainty that was both terrifying and electrifying. For a long moment, I didn't move. Maybe if I was quiet enough, he would think I wasn't home. He would go away. We could both go back to pretending. He knocked again, louder this time. Patient, insistent. My legs felt like lead as I walked to the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. This was it. The confrontation. The awkward end. I took a deep breath and pulled the door open. It was Grant. Of course it was Grant. He looked as tired as I felt. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was still a mess. He was wearing a clean shirt, but it was rumpled like he'd slept in it. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his own feet, shoved into a pair of worn work boots. "Hey," he said, his voice rough. "Hey." I managed to reply, my voice a squeak. An ocean of awkward silence stretched between us. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Can I come in?" he finally asked, his eyes briefly flicking up to meet mine before darting away again. I stepped back, holding the door open. He walked past me into my living room, and the space immediately felt smaller, crowded by his presence. He stood in the middle of my perfectly arranged rug, looking entirely out of place, like a boulder in a Japanese garden. He looked around, taking in my books, my muted art prints, the quiet order of my life. "You left," he said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. He still wasn't looking at me. He was looking at a framed photo of Sarah and me on my bookshelf. I had to work? I lied, the word tasting foul. He turned to me then, and his eyes were filled with a raw, bruised hurt that stole the air from my lungs. Bullshit, the word wasn't angry. It was just tired. And true. "I didn't text," he said, running a hand through his already messy hair. "I didn't know what to say. I woke up and you were gone. I thought I scared you. I thought I pushed too fast. I thought I screwed everything up, my carefully constructed narrative. The one where I was the villain, the one where he was disgusted and full of regret, crumbled into dust. He wasn't regretting it. He was anxious. He was just as lost in this as I was. He thought he was the one who had made the mistake. I thought I scared you. I confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. I thought you woke up and regretted it. You're going through everything. With Amelia. I thought I was just, I don't know, a mistake, an experiment. He took a step closer to me, and then another, until he was standing right in front of me. He was so tall. I had to tilt my head back to look at him. "A mistake," he said, his voice low and intense. "Leo, looking at you is the only thing that's made any sense in the last 6 months." My heart stopped. It just stopped. "For years," he went on, his gaze unwavering, "I'd see you at Sarah's place. You were always so quiet, so contained, like you were in your own little world, and it was so much more interesting than the one everyone else was in. I didn't know how to talk to you. What would I even say? Hey, I like your quiet energy. He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. I'm not good with words. I build things. That's what I know. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air between us for a second before he gently cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The touch was electric, just like before, but this time there was no accident. It was deliberate, intentional. What happened the other night? That wasn't a mistake, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It was terrifying and confusing and new, but it wasn't a mistake. Waking up alone, that felt like a mistake. Tears pricked my eyes. Tears of relief, of disbelief, of a decade of pin-up hope finally being let loose. I am scared, Grant, he whispered. Me too, he admitted, his thumb never ceasing its gentle caress. I have no idea what I'm doing. My whole life just got blown to pieces. But I know I don't want to go back to pretending you're not there. He glanced down, and I noticed for the first time that he was holding something in his other hand. A small terracotta pot. And it was a sad, slightly lopsided cactus. He held it out to me. My new place, it doesn't get a lot of sun in the morning, he said, a faint blush creeping up his neck. I figured maybe you could look after this for me. You've got good light here. I took the pot from him. It was heavy, solid, real. It wasn't just a cactus. It was an excuse, a reason to come back, a promise. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for me. And this, he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a single, shiny key on a plain silver ring. He pressed it into my palm. My fingers closed around the cool metal. In case you ever, want to drop by and not have to sneak out, that was it. The symbolic gesture, the tangible proof, a key, a cactus, the building blocks of something new. I looked from the key in my hand to his face, and I smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. I'd like that. The tension broke. The fear receded, replaced by a fragile, fluttering hope. He smiled back, a slow, beautiful smile that transformed his entire face, chasing away the shadows. And in the quiet, orderly space of my living room, he leaned down and kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation, no questioning. It was a kiss of confirmation, of recommitment, a promise of a new beginning. The days that followed were a process of careful, tender navigation. We were two people learning a new language together, a language of touch and shared silences and quiet mornings. There were mornings I'd wake up in my own bed and he'd be in my kitchen, his large frame somehow not out of place anymore, making coffee. The smell of it would fill my apartment, a new scent mingling with the old ones of paper and ink. He was terrible at it. The coffee was always too strong, too bitter, but I'd drink every drop just to watch him watch me, a hopeful, anxious look on his face. There were evenings I'd use the key. I'd let myself into his still Spartan apartment and find him asleep on the couch, exhausted from a long day. I'd cover him with a blanket and sit and watch him, the fierce love I felt for him a quiet, steady warmth in my chest. His ugly little cactus sat on my windowsill, catching the best of the afternoon sun. I watered it diligently. I felt like its guardian. We started building a new routine, one that intertwined our two separate lives. We'd eat dinner sitting on his floor, a habit we never broke, talking about our days. He'd tell me about drywall and support beams, and I'd tell him about kerning and color theory. We found a strange, beautiful rhythm in our differences. He was the solid foundation. I was the careful design. Sleeping next to him was no longer a source of anxiety. It was my greatest comfort. I learned the landscape of his sleeping form, the way he'd fling an arm out, the soft rumble of his snores. Waking up tangled in the sheets with him, his body a warm, solid presence against mine, felt more like home than my own apartment ever had. The morning after was no longer a crucible of fear, but a quiet promise of another day. One Saturday, he brought over a box of his books. Old paperbacks with cracked spines and dog-eared pages. Nowhere to put these, he said, looking at my own overflowing shelves. Together, we spent the afternoon reorganizing. We made space. We blended my collection of art history tomes with his worn-out thrillers. My life of curated solitude was being joyfully, willingly disrupted. His books sat next to mine, a tangible representation of our two worlds merging. I look back on a man I was before that Tuesday, the man who lived in a fortress of his own making, and I barely recognize him. My life was neat, it was ordered, it was safe, but it was also small. I had been living in grayscale, and Grant brought the color. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the disruption that knocked my world off its axis only to set it right again on a stronger, truer foundation. The day I agreed to help him move furniture, I had no idea I was also agreeing to move my own heart out of a long, lonely storage. We were both moving into something new. Not just new apartments, but a new life. One we were building together, one awkward confession, one hesitant kiss, and one ugly cactus at a time. He wasn't a locked door anymore. He was home, and for the first time, I felt brave enough to use my key.